And welcome everyone. Come in, take a seat. Firstly, I just want to say thanks to previous speakers for setting the context of the training and how we're looking to adapt across the military. They bring up digital twins quite a lot. I really hate that term, digital twins. A friend of mine sent an email with a picture of Michael Portillo going, "Here's your digital twin." For those who don't know who Michael Portillo is, he's a socially gauche oddball who wears odd-coloured trousers and travels around the world. So perhaps it's not that far removed, really. But I look after simulation for the Joint Aviation Command. The ARC is formerly known as the Joint Helicopter Command. And we're a multi-platform, multi-service organization that operates and generates for the one aviation brigade combat team based out of Army headquarters, and we're owned by the Army. So we have Commander Helicopter Force, we have the lift capabilities of the Air Force, and we have the attack and find elements of the Army Air Corps as well. So why am I up here doing this? Well, I said on the DSET committee, I asked that we get a bit more relevant regarding what we do in terms of bringing all the stakeholders from both military and industry together and other interested parties. And we start to focus on what we're about. With the new CGS coming in to the fray, his focus is more on lethality in this current operating environment. It's essential that we start to look towards the multi-domain operation and how we actually serve that. Simulation-wise, I was in '88 and went into pilot training so successfully. I went into navigator training thereafter and then lost my MedCat, sadly, on the Tornado F3 and rerouted into the world of armor. So I've experienced simulation from a 2-hour embuggeration of a Raymond Baxter-esque character behind a console, feeding emergency after emergency. With no visuals whatsoever, apart from the odd big moving map occasionally. I then, in the armor world, got into Challenger 2 and sat there looking through periscopes down at the Cat at Warminster, thinking, this is not believable at all, and looking at pre-Minecraft-esque graphics, which were pretty woeful back in the day. But I have to say, an hour and a half in, I'm fighting an all-arms battle. And that was great. So I had recce, I had infantry support, and I had my armor context, and there was some very limited aviation support into that. But the key thing about simulation, as we find certainly across JC, while we're very good at conducting conversion to type, conversion to role in our various full motion simulators, we're less good at piecing it all together into actually fighting the next fight. And simulation, to remember, is not there to replace the live environment. It's there to augment it. But what we can do with it is absolutely max out our crews with flying along in a contested, degraded operational environment, losing a donk while being engaged, while being jammed, etc., and start to build up their awareness so they're more efficient out into the world itself. One of the big problems we'll face, and it's interesting that we have Navy and Air Force as well as the Army context in this, and is exemplified right the way across this, and not just within the British military, but everything, and certainly from having discussed with my Dutch colleagues, is the world of stovepiping. Everyone's got the right intent towards getting on. Unfortunately, we live in our single services with our career pressures and everything else that means that we get on and we deliver our own little areas without necessarily scoping out what the big requirement is at the strategic level. And I think this is very pertinent when we look at the likes of where is Stratcom's role in defining what we do. Stratcom, we've got a very good function in the Defense Modeling and Simulation Office for setting standards and interoperability, etc. But how it comes to war fighting, how we're going to all work together to meet the MDO is a different question. I'm going to say no more on that because we've got a very wide and capable panel who are going to come up and present first and talk about their areas. So first up is going to be Group Captain Ruari Henderson-Begg, a fellow one-wing directional consultant of old, albeit going back to the stovepiping days, two kinds of aircraft, fighters and targets. And Ruari was in the bomber world, and as many of you know, it now heads up simulation in the Royal Air Force, and very capably as well. So please welcome up Group Captain Ruari Henderson-Begg to to talk about the Air Force conference.
Good morning, everybody. Those of you used to dealing with the military will know that the first thing we do is set the room to the right classification. And you also all know that the classification at the moment is election warning red, which theoretically limits what we're going to say. However, what I'm going to do is give you my thoughts and opinions as a consumer and deliverer of op training over the last 30 years. I'm going to talk about Air Force programs of records, and I'm going to talk about general philosophy. I don't think there's anything that is affected by PERDA in that, and I think my colleagues, Stephen from the Navy, will do the same. So let's do the old Simon Sinek thing and start with why. We're talking about MDO training challenges for the next hour or so. Why do we need to do MDO training at all? Okay, sorry, I probably need to go back one. Didn't even touch that, so clearly it wants me to get through the presentation quickly. Why? Warfare's never been a single domain operation. Okay, if you go back to the Roman invasion of Britain, that was a land maritime affair. You can't get to Britain without using boats, so it's a beach landing when it comes down to it. Even if you go back to Troy, then you're using the forebears of cyber and deception using the Trojan horse. You're using catapults to make use of the air by throwing things. So warfare has always been multi-domain. We're just reinventing the wheel to a certain extent. Still moving forward. Air, if we just take that forward, air does not win wars on its own. Air creates the conditions for the other services to be able to operate, whether that's for our Navy to move its carriers forward in order to be able to project force, whether it's for our land forces to be able to operate within an acceptable level of risk in the operating environment. So air is, by its nature, a joint enabling capability. And in turn, it's dependent on the other environments. A deployed operating base, whether on land or afloat, needs the other services for logistics, for force protection, and. We are entirely reliant nowadays on space for GPS, timing, comms, etc. So everything is multi-domain. So the bottom line, I think, is there. If we need to operate effectively together, which we all understand that we do, then we need to train together. So MDO training, MDI training, I don't really mind what you call it, is integral and is very necessary. And then extrapolate that further. That's not just within the UK. There's a lot of talk with the election about the size of our armed forces, the capability of our armed forces, and what we spend on our armed forces. But again, if I talk about air never going to war on its own, I think you'd find it very hard to think of a context where the UK would go to war on its own. So multi-domain integration, multi-domain training does not merely mean the 4 physical environments and cyber/EW. It means the multinational domain as well. And it also probably means the other government departments. As we see, looking at a conflict in the Middle East, a lot of the questions are what happens next, and those are lessons that we should have learned from our experiences in Iraq, in Afghanistan. What happens after the shooting stops? So then some training considerations for you. In terms of security and operational sovereignty, previous presentations here, I've talked about the pervasive surveillance of the live environment. So everything is seen. So when we are doing multi-domain integration in the live environment, what are we actually training? Are we training those day one, night one tactics? Are we training the 4th, 5th gen integration? Or are we training the inter-service integration, how we play together nicely in the sandpit, whether that's at a national or an international level? Then you've got safety. So as Max will be able to tell you from flying training and from operations within Joint Aviation Command, safety is forefront, and almost every safety regulation is there because somebody has messed up and because we need to keep ourselves and the public safe. So there are rules that we need to adhere, whether that's in the air, on the sea, or on the ground. And those are different in peacetime and wartime because the risk appetite for operational and operating risk changes. So when we're doing training, there's no point in doing that training if we kill ourselves doing it. That's just ineffective. We need to make it as realistic as possible while still being safe. The next context really for me is geography. And again, this is all about training as we will fight. And you literally can't do that very easily, often in the live environment, because of the other conflicts. And that's not just the physical conflicts of where is the airspace, where are the oil fields, where are the shipping lanes, where are the roads, the villages, etc., that you might need to use or drive through. It's about the electromagnetic spectrum. Which parts of it are being used for the banking sector? Which parts are being used for communications? What can you do in wartime that you can't do in peacetime? The next is mass. So again, back to the size of the UK Armed Forces and our ability to deploy mass onto the field. How much can we get together at any one time, given other training needs, other operational needs, serviceability of aircraft, kit, etc., and how do we bring those people together? But more importantly, if you come back to the why are we doing that training at every level, whether that's individual, small team, large team, collective, or international? What are you trying to achieve, and what do you need to achieve at each level, so you aren't constantly bringing people together in the same place at vast expense and potentially disruption to other things going on. Multi-domain operations are complex. We've discussed that previously today. Putting together a realistic operational multi-domain scenario and running it through is also a complex undertaking. So if we're going to make that training effective and realistic, the scenarios, the vignettes have to be sufficiently realistic and complex. We also then have to be able to deliver them and then debrief them as well. And I'm aware I'm just touching at the top level on things that we'll maybe explore further in the questions and answers. And then finally is, who are you operating against? Can you have a credible op force that is multi-domain? And how do you represent those capabilities when we don't have access to those capabilities in real life? Do you guise? Do you buy those capabilities? How do you do it through the gameplay, etc.? So there are a number of considerations there, and all of those drive a discussion about what you do in the live environment, what you do in the synthetic environment, how you blend those environments, what you do as a single service, what you do as a UK, and what you do as an international coalition. So though that kind of sets the context, how is air looking at it? So this is now not going to work at all. Apologies. There we go. So this is the next generation operational training program or portfolio within air, delivering an operational training ecosystem that will look at live, virtual, constructive, and blended capabilities, enabling each activity to be done in the most effective environment. Those activities could be force generation, it could be T&E, it could be R&D, it could be wargaming, but all of those will by default need to be multi-domain. And many of you will have seen this slide before, which just depicts how the next generation operational training portfolio is structured. A suite of live activities under the Mustang banner and a suite of synthetic capabilities, all supported by live and synthetic enablers, and then bringing those together under a set of core enablers. Offer that just as a way of illustrating Air's approach. Various people are delivering that, and various things are supporting or supported by that. And that just illustrates how you need to weave this into all of the other activities within defense. And that's where I'll leave it, so I don't steal other people's sandwiches. I look forward to questions later on in the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Group Captain Ruari. Next up, to give a bit more of an international perspective from the Dutch Simulation Centre, is Lieutenant Michiel Bon. I tried pronouncing the Dutch, but my Dutch is really lacking at the moment. But so Michiel wears a naval uniform. He's also a civil servant. He's also part of the Dutch Marine Corps as well. And so as a cavalry officer, I totally appreciate he's got a multitude of uniforms at home by which to wear, which is always pleasing. But Michiel, really interested. Thanks for coming, and really interested to hear the perspective from the Netherlands.
Thank you. Well, I will be a bit loud to hear. Thank you. As first, I'd like to start with a shout out to the DSET divas, and to thank Rudy Nice for making this all possible, and the team. I liked it very much, and thank you very much. To get on with the more serious part. My name is Bon, Michiel Bon, and I work for the Simulation Center in the Netherlands. And you see it in the slides. I'm head of the Bureau of Knowledge, Innovation and Policy. Besides that, also Deputy Commander of the Center of Excellence there. So my business card is like this. I will talk to you about some of the challenges we have in the world of multi-domain operations, and what I think is needed to solve these problems. So a little bit about MDO, a little bit about the simulation part, since I'm from the Simulation Center. What does it take to transform and to make it happen in the simulation world, and what you can do, more important. Somebody ever said, when I was beginning 14 years ago within the Ministry of Defense, we should train as we fight, and we fight as we should train. I borrowed a picture of the UK Strategic Command about MDO, and it means basically all kinds of assets that we have, air, naval, space, cyber, working together in one big campaign. I think this is a very good picture that explains it all. I'll take you back a little bit into history. A few years ago, 2018, there was a big exercise, the RIMPAC 2018. And one of those parts of those exercises was SINK-X. I never heard of it again, but it's the purpose of sinking a ship. Very nice. They took an old tank landing ship, they put it into the ocean, and what's more fun than fire to the ship with all kinds of means necessary. Guns, missiles, you name it, torpedoes. And that they did it. They fired, the Navy fired torpedoes on it, harpoon missiles, standard missiles, very well, and nice big explosions. But there was something special. Also, there were fired HIMARS from an army unit. There was an army unit on the ground, and they fired a HIMARS missile onto the ship, also causing destruction to the ship. It didn't survive. Back to a more personal story. A few years ago, 2020, I was sailing on the Johan de Witt. The Johan de Witt is an amphibious landing ship, and we had a very big naval exercise in the southern part of France, together with all other nations, France, UK, you name it. And the main scenario was an amphibious landing. what of course is very cool to do because you don't do that every time. But on that landing, there were very much resources. There were helicopters, there were boats, there were ships, and yes, there's a difference between a ship and a boat. There were jets flying over. We had cyber units. We had, well, all kinds of units working together, all doing different tasks. Also, army units doing their thing on the ground, and commanded by one command. And that was for me the really multi-domain operation environment. I know that in the Ministry of Defense, we like abbreviations. So we have the MDO, we have the multi-domain training, and I'd like to introduce a new one. Multi-domain simulation training. One of our big commanders in the Netherlands said a few years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, there should be 50% simulation. Very short thing to say, but he didn't say how, he didn't say when, he didn't say how to reach it. So if we think about 50% simulation, that means that when we do the multi-domain operations in the operational part, we should also convert it to the simulation part, because we have to train those people, we have to educate those people about it. So I came up with the term multi-domain simulation training. You see the operational part, how we do it, or some examples, but how do we do it? And then I speak for the Netherlands, in real life in the simulation world. We do it linear. We put people in a tank simulator, CV90 simulator, and we practice just that part. We put a door gunner in a door gunner simulation, we put in that part. We have the nice bridge simulator in Den Helder. We train them to steer the ship and do all ship maneuvers. But we don't connect them both. We don't connect them with a cyber simulation. We don't connect them with the anti-air warfare simulation. We use the linear system. And I think that can be better, because in the real world, when you really want to implement multi-domain operations, you should also do that in simulation and in training. Then I began asking myself, okay, but the simulation part and the simulation world, training world, is that comparable to the real world? Because if you can answer that with no, it's not comparable, why should you train like the world? And there was a yes and a no. It's not comparable right now because we have all linear simulators. And we use them linear, and it's not connected, or mostly not connected, with other ones. So it's very difficult without a human interface to train NDO. We have highly technical skilled people, specialists, that do their independent training, also not MDO capable. But they all are dependable on success of others. In their own training, they can do it, but they can do more effective things in larger operations when they rely on others and they work together. And all work in a very difficult environment. When you see the training vignettes, it's not simply like there's a target, shoot it and kill it, but there's a whole lot of going on. From the political side, there are a lot of enemy units, and you have to consider a lot of things when you're in the bigger exercises. And that's currently not done in the so-called linear training. So what does it take to really train MDO in a simulation world? Because it's not simply a question of, okay, I take one simulator, I take another simulator, let's try to connect them, and boom, we can do it. That's not the way. It's a start. One of the most important things is to have a multi-domain command and control system. because otherwise you can connect your simulators and you have an Air Force command and you have a naval command not talking to each other, or maybe talking a little bit together. You need one multi-domain command. That's challenge one. Then you need the cross-domain capability. And in there, it will be said more times, you have to do standards. You see, when you have different systems now, they can be connected, but it's very difficult. And when you all use one standard, it makes it probably a lot more easier. But also, and that's, I think, even besides all the technical mumbo jumbo, it's more important to have a multi-domain mindset within the civilian world and within the training world, within the simulation world, so that people realize what multi-domain operations are and how it should be implemented in their training, so they can deliver it quite effectively. Another one, when I thought about it, was be flexible in security. The thing that I heard yesterday and I hear in my daily work is also when we ask something and it's very simple, let's try to connect this one and this one, or let's try to do something in the cloud. And as soon as the word cloud is falling, all the security guys say, oh, nope, not possible. We cannot do it. Without even listening what you want, how to do it. But yes, there are security things that you need to solve. So there should be a more flexible security layer somehow, and think about it, how to connect all those systems to make it possible to have a multi-domain operation training. I don't know how it is in other countries, but our IT infrastructure is, to put it mildly, not enough to do what we should want. The good thing is when we try to download large files for our train, etc., it's much faster when I do it at home than when I do it at the Ministry of Defense. And of course, we have all kinds of security issues, and you need to look at all those data streams. But when we really use modern simulators, we use the multi-domain training and simulation environment, we have to connect them all together, but we use big pipelines for a massive amount of data. And of course, also the security for that. And we need somehow a central MNS command and decision process in place. In the Netherlands, we have a kind of a council, because in the army, we have all kinds of different simulation parts doing their things, and it was a wise decision to put them together. And although that's no formal organ to make decisions, we decided that for the army, that's a place where decisions can be made, problems can be laid on the table there. And we discuss it and we say, okay, the way ahead is that way or that way, and then we do it. But that's only army. For multi-domain operations, you don't need army, you don't need air force, you don't need space, you need them all together. So you need that kind of process and that kind of council on a very big level. Or even better, I propose an MNS general. Why not? But that's all big stories, what we should do. But what can you do when you return home tomorrow or Monday? Make sure that everywhere and everything that you are doing, that NATO standards are applied. And yes, it's we use NATO when we can, and where we cannot do it, we do national things. But still, I see many times that we don't use that standards because reason X, Y, Z, etc., etc. But to be able to make a multi-domain operation in the Netherlands, let's even say with several countries together, you need to connect on several levels and need to enforce those standards. The same is for procurement. Now we're thinking about systems that come into place in 2030. And for that systems, you also need standards. But maybe you don't have those standards right now. Make sure in your procurement process that something is in the contract that a supplier will adjust to those standards, even if they're not there. And that's all procurement wise, but set something in place to make that possible, so that we can buy a system that's able to connect and to able to interface with other systems. Because when you buy it and don't do it, then you buy a very nice system, very new, hyper modern, but you miss that part, and still you cannot do MDO. I already said it, lay down a sufficient IT infrastructure. That's a clear one. Think large, act large, and as my mentor in the beginning said when I was in the Navy, how to eat an elephant in small bits. So yes, we must have the big plan and the big architectures and all the big future things, but start small. Start in your own office. Start with yourself. What can I do to make it possible that the whole of Ministry of Defense goes to MDO? And very important, invite other people when making your scenarios, think about your scenarios and employ those scenarios. It's nice that we have a very big scenario about the Army, and we do a very big brigade exercise. But will it help when we put somebody from the Air Force inside and said, we like to have an MDO? And maybe we need your expertise to know how those air operations are going. How can we integrate that in our scenario? And the same with cyber, the same with space, all kind of specialist process and procedures that we as Army guys, Navy guys, that's a difficult question, don't know, but we need those inputs. So let's work also there together to try to make a good scenario that makes it able to use MDO. With all the benefits, of course, and I looked it up online, there are very much benefits, but some of them are basically when you have this in place after so many years, there should be also a more effective exploitation of data analytics, a faster exchange of data and less human errors, the exchange of knowledge that I love. I'd like to hear what Air Force does, what space does, but I'm kind of an information junk. And you make it possible that multi-domain operations will be available through the whole chain of ETEE, education, training, exercise, and evaluation, and not just one part, because when you want to do it effectively, you need to do it everywhere. And the final reason why we all do this and why we sit here and why we do our job, to make sure that the military personnel is well prepared for the future battle environment. And how you do it? With enthusiasm. That's, I think, the most important thing when you go to your office at Monday. Think about it and try to be enthusiastic. How can I do things to improve and to make it possible for my company or my department to prepare for MDO? And I think that was my last slide. Thank you very much.
Michael, thank you wel. Finally up is Lieutenant Commander Steve Gowling. He's going to talk about Spartan and the Navy's contribution towards the MDO. Stephen, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So apologies if anyone was expecting me to be a Lieutenant Commodore. I heard that was the announcement down below. I'm not too sure that exists, nor have I been promoted in the last hour. But hopefully the presentation focusing on what we have done both steers away from any risks around PERDA, but also helps to sort of put it into a tactical context of multi-domain operations within a training space that leads on nicely from the group captain and from the Netherlands 007 presentations regarding both aspects. So just to provide a bit of sort of situational setting, and I think that in terms of multi-domain operations, the Royal Navy is in a it is in a fairly unique position, as with national navies, that predominantly we work on a multi-domain basis through the nature of our business. The wider view of the synthetic environment, being able to promote training in multi-domain is what I really want to touch upon today, and how hopefully the capitalizing of such technology could benefit training going forwards for the benefit of multi-domain operations within the Royal Navy and wider. This slide very much just sets the scene in terms of where we are amongst the UK frontline commands. And hopefully I don't lose the power on the screen at the bottom, which is turning off in 190 seconds for anybody that's on the technical front. But the Spartan program is very much aligned to the Gladiator program from the Air Force in the sense of the establishment of a synthetic training hub to support distributed synthetic collective training. And that is in aid of providing us geographical reach to provide training and exercises worldwide, whilst also sort of not hindering ourselves on operations and also the physical deterrence that our ships and units and presence provides worldwide, which I think is incredibly important not to take any emphasis away from in today's age. The program that I run, look after, and act as a program officer for was changed from what was DOTCM, the Defence Operational Training Capability in Maritime, under the program name of Spartan. And we have several facets of work that we're looking at. And today we'll touch upon the small red blobs that sit around the south side of the Spartan program, Spartan Hub Circle. And that's sort of focused on how we might support multi-domain operations through a platform-enabled training capability, or at least the promise that that could offer to future capability. It's important to recognize the tiers of training that we operate in, and certainly this is taken from policy of 822 and the Royal Navy's take on how we manage it. Individuals going through the Navy training will start off under the directional organisation ownership of people in training that support the individual training elements. They then work through into the collective training space once they've been given their professional education and training. And it's within these tiers of space that we then start to see the operation of sub-teams, teams and beyond that work both in the maritime space single-handedly and then also out towards the multi-domain operations as we start to incorporate our forces. The program is specifically looking towards the collective training space. And certainly as we look at MDO, that's very much where I see the training being sat for predominant training. And multi-domain operations is as much about the vertical integration as it is with the horizontal integration, that being how we look at our tactical, operational and strategic level training as much as it is across the frontline commands and the other services, whether that be national or international. It also is probably one to recognise that as we look at multi-domain operations, looking at the tiers of training and who our target audience is, that's applicable to the Royal Navy. The way that it's viewed in other services, for example, the Army's interpretation of the training tiers work on a alphabetical system. I believe it's from Alpha through India, to that degree. But I think it's an important note to make that actually when you're looking at multi-domain operations, who your target audience are, what you're looking to train, it's making sure that it's also comparable against the other services in what level they're expecting and deem the training to be gained at. And I think that's also applicable to what we learned through the PETC trial. Some of those initial assumptions on who was going to be trained, what they wanted to be trained on, and how became the fore. And apologies as I sort of look around, my screen's gone black. So to touch upon the actual trial itself, PETC, Platform-Enabled Training Capability, we ran, this is not particularly helpful, so the training itself was done across two effectively capability demonstrators, two trials to understand how the capability could support the Royal Navy in onboard training. And this is different from what we currently have in service, for example, our shore-based simulators, because this is driving a capability into the hands of the operators on their operational platforms. The initial trial was done on board a single ship, and I'll touch upon what each of them did from the 22 to 23 trial, but we look to expand that one across both multiple ships operating together within a multi-domain environment and also across multiple units at reach. So in phase one, we had a single frigate, and that was looking at a direct stimulation of the combat management system. And this was to enable a synthetic training environment to be delivered from an exercise control facility, delivered over to the ship, so that they could integrate that training system with their onboard combat management system. That was done early in 22 and used the Type 23 frigate. We expanded on that phase of training in 2023, and we pulled together the Carrier Strike Group. And what was developed was a training scenario that supported the operational teams on board at a tactical level and integrated some of the principal warfare officers to support an overall warfighting effort. There were very much a focus on the multi-domain environment in the sense of the subsurface, surface, and air threats that were applicable. But as I say, this is a capability that was in a sort of demonstration phase and is still one that requires development. So whilst there wasn't a tangible onboard subsurface operators element to it, it provided the threats and representation within the scenario that you might not have got from perhaps just a sole real world event being taken place. As we ran out that training, it was very much a case of talking to the ship's companies and understanding what the aims of the trial were. There was straight away a drive to get into the more operational level with the principal warfare commanders and the teams trying to drive a more sort of strategic operational view of how they were going to run that scenario. The aim of the trial was to look very much at a technical architecture and to support the tactical element. But as I say, and referring back to the previous slide, it's understanding that training tier and where the operational training is aimed for to support the progression of the event. So what I'm drawing upon here is predominantly based on what the benefits were from the use of a platform-enabled training capability. Hopefully looking at it through the lens of multi-domain operations, I'd like to think that we can take this as the benefits and also some potential challenges that might lurk, especially when looking at the tiers of training that we were supporting. And from a vertical integration of multi-domain operations, from a tactical level, looking then through to operational and strategic, I think that some of the benefits that synthetic training or simulated training gives us within the likes of PET-C or to the service is also one that flexes in degrees of benefits and opportunity, as well as potential challenges as you look at who the training audience are and also at what level of training they're receiving from strategic down to tactical. The reason for that, for example, is the first part, looking at the significant benefits in the qualitative and quantitative training, particularly through after-action review. And obviously, being able to work in an MDO environment and to support the training, as I've said, it's nothing that's unique to the Royal Navy for the training and the work that we do, certainly in a live environment. But the ability to then sort of go back and learn the lessons and to investigate at what moment, at what time, what was said, who was doing what, is very much there within the synthetic domain where that the data can be captured, shared and exploited for learning and then future use and reuse. As I would suggest, you look at the other areas of the training tier, as you get towards the more tier 2 to tier 2 plus, multiple organizations working together collaboratively with different forces, how you involve that after action review, how you support those lessons learned and the qualitative data recording is probably one that becomes more of a challenge as you look then how to debrief it properly, effectively, and also what the training audience is. How do you make sure that everybody within that training cycle gains the same benefit that they would have, whether it be limited down to the sort of tier 1 when you're at a tier 2 exercise. So it touches upon the repeatability, scalability. I think from a tactical level like this exercise was, it probably wouldn't be too difficult to be in a position where you wanted to or take an executive decision to either stop, pause, or repeat certain elements of the training if there was a necessity for it. As you scale DST to support multi-domain operations across multiple large-scale units and areas, I would hazard to say that becomes a more complex challenge if you wanted to get into that space, and therefore it probably looking more at the synthetic training capability as being an aid and a benefit to the live training, and some of the benefits that we're seeing through the individual trial that we saw may not be completely applicable in all areas of multi-domain training. I touched upon it before, but I think that there is part of the interpretation of how we deliver simulated training to the ships is one that causes a little bit of contention in the sense of how we'll take it forwards. There's always the view that the technology and the safety case and the implementation needs to be done and achieved in a safe and compatible environment, which will probably start off being alongside before we can start taking it to sea. There's also the view that there is a potential that synthetic training would replace the live training, but I don't see that, and certainly my superiors don't believe that that's fully the case. In fact, I think that the use of synthetic training, and if we look at the United States Navy continuous training environment as an example, it's provided more opportunity for training, more value in training, and has basically excelled the live training with the synthetic wraparound than it has done to replace the live training. And I think, or I'd imagine, words according to Steve, that we would probably see something relatively similar. On a technical front, there are challenges. And I think looking at how we sort of blend in, as my colleague sort of said before from the Netherlands, looking at the sort of design of synthetic training to live and saying, and we've had similar, quoted on the sort of 50% live to 50% synthetic. There's been different figures banded around, but I think it's understanding and being appreciative of what that looks like and how that would sort of be used in our actual training. In the sense of the technology behind line of sight communications, we were very much in the space of attempting to show that this could be geographically agnostic, and therefore you could keep units dispersed but participating together, whether that be for force generation, force sustainment, or to support them in a task group should they need to be able to re-roll into activity to support global events. The technology on that is one that's still maturing, and it's certainly one that doesn't come with its complications, such as bandwidth, latency, the ability to get the data across to the units on restricted wires. Voice communications, we're using multiple ships here. So we're talking about multi-domain operations. We're not necessarily talking about a single ship or a single technical architecture that's going to support, the one and only thing that you're looking at doing. Perhaps with some shore-based simulators, that's the case. But looking at multiple ships with different technology, different vendors, different OEMs, comes about with its own challenges. And communications are one that needs to be well exploited so that we can gain the benefit of training. The lack in certain areas of communication does have a hindering effect on the ability to effectively work and to communicate and to train together, and is one of vital importance. As part of the trials, it was using the digital shadow, digital twin variation of a combat management system in terms of how we can exploit the operational software built in with its combat systems equipment. And again, it's part of that understanding across the domains that you're going to use that, across the different capabilities that would hopefully be aligned to support the same type of software, hardware architecture to allow a greater ease of interoperability. But there's always going to be the challenges provoked with trying to get those systems to work. And I think the evolution of systems, what is key to the ability of distributed synthetic training, certainly within a multi-domain operational environment, is the ability to build and develop with pace that meets the current age of either technology or aggression or forces or capabilities. And using such capability within the service, one for multi-domain operations, but also to exploit and to learn from, is not just as much applicable in the training space, but it also has a potential for TAC dev, for operational analysis, and for other research methods that will help us to build our capability going forwards. And it's therefore the objectives of the team to engage with other areas of the Royal Navy and Defence to make sure that a capability that's delivered for the future has applicability for them as much as just the training domain itself. I think that should cover it for myself. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to the questions.
Stephen, thank you very much. So I'm going to invite the panel up onto the stage to take any questions from the floor. Some interesting observations coming out and some common themes, which are quite disturbing. It's interesting, having spoken to my American counterparts in the Army, Air Force, and Marine Corps, that trying to integrate the entire US Department of Defense onto one single domain has proved ridiculously expensive, and the complexities therein. But anyway, open to the floor now for any questions. Hold on, microphone's coming.
Thanks. Hi, sir. So we heard Director Land Warfare yesterday talking sort of similar numbers and ideas that we've heard from both the Navy and from Dutch, and probably from the Air Force as well, in terms of the amount of simulation we should be doing. And yet I've seen from both in industry and within the military, we still don't have an established mechanism of a career stream in modeling and simulation to support that. So to anybody in the panel, what is being done to be able to do this at the lowest level so that when it comes to doing multi-domain operation training and simulation, we can do it effectively?
So I'll probably just take that and then pass that down. I think it's really interesting that there isn't, and that most of us that come into it have got a very limited experience. Some of us, no experience within our department at all. But the fact is that it's, as was said in an earlier presentation, it's got to be top-led but bottom-fed in terms of how we achieve that. There's a lot of expertise at the working level that can feed into this, but equally, as we've learned today, we need that strategic narrative to try and shape what's coming down and actually start to look at what our career streams are. Trying to take old PIDs or old posts within establishments and squeeze them in, effectively putting a round peg into a square hole or vice versa, is not the way to do this. And I do believe, personally, we need a bit of a radical reform. Over to the panel. Any views?
There we go. Don't put me in charge of technology. No, I think that to sort of echo the point is that from our side within the programme, it's probably the closest thing to understanding the need for that M&S SWEP and the ability to gain advice and support from SMEs. It's exactly the reason why we've had to rely on going out to industry as well to get that sort of technical support. And from our perspective at a tactical level, it's being able to raise up that message and knowledge to the seniors, to areas of defence, to say the need and the requirement that we have. Only recently we've filled the position of a Royal Navy Service Command Technology Authority, or Technical Authority, SCTA. And it's those steps in the right direction that starts to give the ability for the Royal Navy, as I speak for the sort of single service or the views of myself, that sort of leg to stand on when it comes to understanding of being able to drive that capability. There's absolutely, and I'm not saying that modelling simulation is the only space that requires this, absolutely not. And I think it's these sort of key niche areas. We've heard from Pan Defence Skills Framework earlier today, but it's how do we start to leverage expertise, acknowledge people, build that skill, either early on in the career, so you can start to leverage that later on down the line. Because opportunities do exist, and there are courses that exist as part of the service. But the question remains, how do we fully exploit that going forward?
Thanks. Michael, in the Netherlands, you've got your own simulation centre, and I believe there's career streams for simulation?
Yes, we have our centre, and we have some kind of education, but not a career stream. I think that would be beneficial for it. I think there are two parts in that answer. It's bottom up and from top to bottom. From bottom up, we have to show what we can do with simulation, what kind of simulations we have and how we can apply it. And then we have to coach people like, okay, you want this, we can do that part with simulation. But also look what kind of simulations are there. Are there maybe some simulators out there in this world that we can use to make it, make the use more? On the other side, you can do it from a bottom level and be very enthusiastic, as I said, but still if the top don't move in that makes it difficult. So also there should be, it should be imposed. From top of, you should be doing so many percentage of simulation in it. And therefore you need some stream, some command, some, I said the M&S general, but some really important counter or whatever that imposes that in all our training, we must have so many percentages. And that means that in all the official training documentation, it should be there. You should do so many percentage with this and this and this system. I think that's a solution, and a career track would be very beneficial. But I see some difficulties because, with that being implemented. It's been talked about it, and I talked about it many years. And I think the Netherlands is too small for it. When you compare it with the UK, you have a lot more personnel and even universities that teach that. So I think we're also having the difficulty that's the whole amount of people working in simulation is maybe too small to have a whole career track. So maybe there should be another solution for that.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Group Captain Ruari, any perspective?
Yeah, I think I broaden it out slightly. I think the modelling and sim SQEP and the SQEP piece was kind of covered during the people keynote this morning. I think when you're looking at MDO training, maybe even more important than for me than the modelling and sim SQEP is the exercise delivery SQEP. How do you develop that MDO training? How do you make sure that the scenarios are realistic, that they're thought through? How do you then deliver them? So you need the intelligence personnel, you need the exercise developers, you need the exercise deliverers. You then need to be able to debrief it, both in terms of the skills in it being able to do that, but also the skills in using whatever presentation systems you need. And if we're going to bring it right down to a level, simulation is just a methods and media, as the educators would give you. It's just a way of delivering stuff. So I think the question is broader than that. That doesn't take away from the fact that the military is not necessarily set up to provide and train people with those qualifications and then to nurture them and retain them throughout their careers.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? One at the back.
Hi, sirs. I just wanted to build on what was just said there. Is there a way of kind of ring fencing some of the budget or putting some emphasis on certain wording when it comes to business cases at the lowest level? For example, I'm at an electronic warfare unit. I can see the huge benefits from just walking around the floor downstairs and certain simulators for our sensors, for example, because we can't just collect on anything because that breaches all sorts of privacy, right? So it's quite hard to train that. But in terms of business cases, it's quite a hard process to get things approved. At the lowest level, is there a way of emphasizing the importance of simulation to get that kind of training out at to lowest level? And then therefore, once that's at that kind of foundation piece, that can get integrated with other parts of the service and build up into the multi-domain. Because at the moment, all of it's really good, but getting access to it for the individual user, I can see that being quite hard and taking quite a long time.
Thanks. That's a really good question. And we see this time and time again where the bottom end users have got the skills and see the potential within the systems we have, yet the upper echelons of the military continuously struggle because they see it as a game. Personally, I find it quite embarrassing that I go home at night and my 17-year-old gobshite of a son is fighting people all around the world on his Xbox. And yet we're the military and we're not even enabled to do that. And that's looking at the overall MDO. When we start to bring it narrower, there are lots of opportunities out there for using simulation in a more agile and a more focused way. And when we're really getting that message out. Interesting enough, the little AH-64 4-ship VR I've just had installed down at Middle Wallop, people have come down and even the frontline users have said, wow, this is really good. And it's a very, very basic system. And actually, when we've taken the brigadiers in and they've looked and they went, this is way better than I expected, because they're still seeing simulation as some kind of game. When at the end of the day, without sounding too blasé about it, you know, when we were 4 years old running around the woods with a stick pretending it was a gun, that was simulation. We just got a bit more serious putting this stuff on and getting a bit more lethal. Rest of the panel.
I think the question largely talks about how you build up your training, and Stephen talked about that vertical integration and the horizontal integration. I think that when you look at individual training, when you're working out how to be good at your job, fight your weapon system, operate your sensor, etc., that's much more focused on you, and that's quite possibly one-dimensional, i.e. not integrating with for air with land or maritime. That's focused in. I absolutely agree that we need to build on that individual training and have that individual training done before you then move into the team and collective parts, which is probably where the multi-domain aspects of it come in more. Do we focus on that team and individual training, and do we make best use of virtual constructive capabilities to do that? No, not at the moment. Are we trying to do better? Yes. It's a slow process.
Regarding that, it's important as a first basic question, what do you want to train when you train a soldier? And do we have the systems to do that? Mostly it might be yes, and when you want to train new capabilities or new skills, then you need maybe new systems. And you have to think very well. It was said the Xbox, the sticks when playing war in the woods. Is that enough to train that person, or do you want more, like an after-action review, or you want to be able to have a better damage model or whatever in that case? So I think that would be the main question. What do we want to train the individual, and what do we need for that? And are those systems enough? Or do we need new stuff? And in case of yes, we need new stuff, we can go to the suppliers that are there and see if there's something applicable for that.
Thanks. I think you're absolutely right in terms of the business case, in terms of resourcing to get these kind of capabilities either bought or to get the units in. And it comes back to the overall view of simulation from the senior elements and applying a sense of budget. You know, you cannot replace live flying hours with synthetic hours. It might save money, but that's not an effective justification for doing it. But equally, you can get far more benefits out of the simulation or the synthetic environment. But equally, you've got to resource that. There needs to be money made available in order that we can get upon that. And I think one last point from me, because I'm going to have to wrap this up, is the fact that we badly need to be exploiting the qualities. The days of the 80s and 90s in Germany, where you went to a squadron bar after work with your soldiers, has largely gone. Most of the soldiers these days seem to be going back to their room in the block and going gaming online, developing systems. And there's a whole host of talent out there that we really could do with exploiting better and bring in this holistic community. Sadly, I'm going to have to wrap it up there because we need to finish a bit early and Abby will take over. But thank you very much for your time. I'd like you to show your appreciation to the panel for their time as well, and come and speak to us afterwards as well.